Tonight's story is called A Breeze and a Bedtime. Subscribe to stay on top of the next story and hear more peaceful journeys like this. Each one made to help you drift off slowly, gently, and deeply. And before you close your eyes completely, we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below and let us know. It began, as it always did, with the hush of the ocean. A low, sleepy wave brushed against the sand, and a soft wind curled through the air like a ribbon through water. This was not just any breeze, it was the breeze. Gentle, glowing in the moonlight, and just barely scented with sea salt and something sweet, like warm driftwood and sun-dried linen. Breeze arrived each evening in Seabury Bay, a small village nestled in the crook of a wide, crescent beach. It slipped between the dunes, over the grassy hilltops, and into the windows of cottages lined with shells and sleepy cats. This was the hour when flip-flops were abandoned near porches, beach buckets rested beside sun-faded towels, and little feet were washed of sand and ready for pajamas. Breeze knew the rhythm of the bay. She floated past the lighthouse first, where a sleepy beam spun slowly across the sea. There, the lighthouse keeper's cat, a gray fluff named Pebble, was already curled up on a cushion, tail twitching in time with the tide. Down below, waves whispered secrets to the shore, and the boats in the harbor bobbed like cradles rocking gently in a nursery. In a cottage with mint-green shutters, a little girl named Lila leaned out her window, holding a bottle to her ear. She liked to collect the sounds of the night, wind, waves, and dreams, and tonight, she was waiting. Breeze swept past her and curled around the bottle, filling it with a soft whoosh. "You're right on time," Lila whispered. She closed the cork gently. Breeze danced in delight, weaving through her wind chimes and lifting a few pages from the book on her bed. The story was about a sea turtle who dreamed of flying. The village below was winding down now. Porch lights blinked on one by one, laundry fluttered like sleepy flies, and someone far off was plucking a lullaby on a ukulele. Breeze drifted onward. She had other friends to visit tonight. Breeze fluttered past Lila's window one last time, giving her curls a gentle tousle. Then, she glided down along the boardwalk, where sea glass gleamed faintly in the cracks between the planks. Seabury Bay always held on to bits of sunlight, even after it dipped below the waterline. Tonight, the sky was still blushing, deep purples and soft coral tones stretched out across the horizon like a watercolor still drying. Breeze followed the scent of lemons and sea oats toward the bakery, where old Miss Norrie was placing her "closed for the night" sign in the window. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her cheeks looked as warm as the bread she baked. As Breeze swept by, Miss Norrie smiled. "Ah, you're here," she said softly, brushing her hair back. "That means bedtime is close. Go on then, go tuck everyone in." And Breeze did. She wound around the dunes where the sand was still warm beneath a soft blue blanket of moonlight. Children had left behind castles that now belonged to crabs and sleepy little clams. Breeze made sure not to topple any towers, just whispered through their tiny windows like a bedtime story only the beach could tell. Then came the cottages, each one different, each one special. In the yellow cottage with the spiral shell door knocker, an old man named Mr. Featherwick was tinkering with his sea clock. It chimed not with bells, but with the sound of distant foghorns and gull cries. He paused and looked out the window. Right on schedule, he murmured, sipping from a steaming mug of dream tea he made with mint, lavender, and just a hint of honeycomb. Now maybe these old eyes will settle. Breeze swirled gently around him, cooling the teacup, brushing the window pane with dew, and fluttering the thin curtains that smelled of linen and lemon. In the next cottage, twin siblings June and Mina were trying to finish folding their last paper boat before bed. Their floor was covered in blueprints and scrap paper and crumpled dreams. "This one has wings," Mina whispered. "Wings don't float." June laughed. Breeze slipped between them, giving the boat a little lift, just enough to make it hover for a second before it sank into Mina's lap. "Maybe they do," she said quietly, and June only smiled. Outside, a sleepy orange cat named Tumble stretched across a weathered rooftop. Breeze gently ruffled his fur, and the cat blinked at the moon. Tumble was a wanderer. Some said he was once a pirate's cat, others believed he had 9 lives and had used only 2. Tonight, he rolled over and let Breeze carry him from rooftop to rooftop like a slow-moving cloud. Farther down the path, past the tide pools and the whale-shaped rock, stood a tall round observatory with a copper dome roof. The moonkeeper lived there. No one knew his real name. He watched the stars and kept notes in tiny, tidy notebooks that smelled like old salt and ink. The moonkeeper was always last to go to sleep, and Breeze always visited him last. Tonight, as she brushed past his brass telescope, he tilted his head. "The air feels hopeful tonight," he said. Breeze curled around his shoulders like a shawl, then drifted to his shelves of glowing lanterns, one for each clear night. Below, the waves had grown quieter now, soft like breath, like a lullaby hummed from the heart of the ocean. The stars blinked into view. 1, 2, then 100. Seabury Bay had yawned and stretched and settled. Breeze looped once around the entire bay, as if tucking it in under a quilt of night sky. And as she floated toward the open sea, she whispered through the leaves of the tall seagrass, "I'll be back tomorrow." Chapter 2, Lila and the Bottled Night Sounds. Lila always waited for Breeze before she began her nighttime collection. She lived in the mint green cottage right at the edge of the bay, where the sand met the seagrasses and wildflowers that danced in the wind. Her windows faced the ocean, and her room was filled with the kinds of things most children only dream of: driftwood mobiles, moonstones, jars of polished beach glass, and bottles. So many bottles. Some tall, some short. Some blue like the deep sea, others clear like fresh air. They lined her shelves, windowsill, and even hung from a net above her bed. Each one held a sound. Not everyone could hear them, but Lila could. With her eyes closed, she could pick up a bottle and know exactly which part of Seabury Bay it belonged to. Tonight, after Breeze's soft hello, Lila reached for the first bottle on her desk, a stubby green one with a cork that always gave her a little squeak when she opened it. She tipped it near her ear. S-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch, S-ch-ch-ch-ch. It was the sound of waves pulling back across wet sand, slow and sleepy, like the ocean breathing in her dreams. Lila smiled. She set the bottle back in its spot and reached for another, a thin blue one with a twisty neck. This one crackled. Crick, crick, tick. The sound of the dunes at dusk, when tiny crabs clip their claws and hide from the moon. She had captured that one near the end of summer, during a picnic with June and Nina. Each sound made her feel something different, comforted, curious, dreamy, brave. Some nights, when she couldn't fall asleep, she'd open a bottle and let the sound float softly through the room like a lullaby. But tonight, she was collecting a new sound. Lila picked up her notebook, the one covered in scallop stickers, and flipped to the page marked "Sounds I Still Need." She tapped her pencil thoughtfully against the paper. The sound of a star falling. The giggle of sea foam. A breeze that carries a wish. She looked at her window. The sky was growing darker now, but still lavender near the edges, like a bruise made of clouds. She tightened her ponytail, slipped on her slippers, which were shaped like dolphins, and tiptoed out onto her little balcony. Her mom and dad were downstairs, tidying up the kitchen, humming an old lullaby. In her hand, she carried a small bottle with a wide mouth, perfect for catching a breeze. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's see what we can find." She held out the bottle into the night air. The breeze danced around it, swirling in a tiny ribbon, and then, whoosh, it dipped right inside. Lila giggled and popped the cork in place. The bottle shimmered for a moment in her hands, then settled. She brought it close to her ear. There was a hush, a rustle, and then something new. A sound soft and round, like the inside of a wish being made. She gasped. "That's it. A breeze that carries a wish." Breeze swirled past her again, lifting a paper boat from her windowsill and carrying it gently into the air. Lila leaned over the railing and watched it go. "Take it to the Moonkeeper," she whispered. "He'll know what to do with it." Downstairs, her mother called, "Lila, time to tuck in." "One more minute," she replied, gently placing the new bottle on her shelf labeled Rare Sounds. She paused, her fingers brushing a bottle she hadn't opened in a while, a squat, cloudy jar with a little ribbon around its neck. She uncorked it slowly. Ka-thump. Ka-thump. Hush. It was the sound of her heartbeat when she was small, curled up on her father's chest as he read stories from the big blue book with the golden spine. Lila smiled. "Maybe I'll listen to you tonight." She placed it beside her pillow. As she turned off her lantern and slipped under her seashell quilt, the wind outside hummed a soft tune against her window. One last swirl of breeze curled through the cracks, brushing her forehead with a kiss of cool air. Lila closed her eyes and whispered, "Good night, Breeze. Come back tomorrow." And Breeze, though she had no voice, answered as always, with a quiet promise carried in the waves and wind. The moon hung clear now, casting silver light through Lila's open window. Her curtains fluttered just slightly, catching the breath of the ocean. She lay beneath her quilt, hands folded on her chest, and listened. Some nights, she counted waves to help her sleep. Other nights, she traced the shape of constellations with her finger on the ceiling, where tiny glow stars marked the sky. But tonight, Lila wanted to listen to the bottles. She reached slowly toward her nightstand and selected 3, her sleep trio, as she called them. The first was the Lighthouse Echo. She uncorked the bottle and let it sit on her quilt. A soft, deep hum emerged, like the call of a foghorn far, far away. It came once, then again, slow and steady, like a lullaby for sailors. The second bottle held the gentle shell tumble. She'd captured it by the tide pools one morning when a wave dragged shells up the beach and left them whispering to each other. This sound was a soft clicking, like marbles rolled gently in a hand. She let that one breathe beside her pillow. And lastly, her favorite, Mama's humming on a cloudy day. That one had been an accident, captured when Lila left a bottle open on the kitchen windowsill as her mother hummed to herself while cooking soup. The melody was barely a tune. Just warmth. She listened. Her body sank deeper into the mattress. She imagined Breeze floating just outside her window still, keeping watch over the dunes, fluffing the clouds, smoothing the ripples on the sea. As her eyes began to close, she heard it, a sound from one of the new bottles. Very faint. Almost like a voice, but not quite. It was soft and high, like wind passing through reeds and stars twinkling in a bowl of sky. Lila didn't open her eyes. She only smiled and whispered into the room. "Thank you, Breeze." Then sleep rolled over her like a gentle wave, carrying her into a dream. And in her dream, Lila stood barefoot at the edge of the sea, holding her bottle. The moon was larger here, so big it filled half the sky. The wind danced around her like a ribbon of light. She opened the bottle and let the wish breeze out into the dream world. The stars sparkled, and the ocean rose, not with danger, but with delight. From the foam came a glowing turtle with wings, just like the one in her book. It blinked at her, then soared up into the sky. Behind it, paper boats rose from the waves like petals blown from a flower. Lila climbed aboard the biggest one, shaped like a seashell, and sailed behind the turtle as the sky opened into a path of light. The dream shimmered like music. Outside, the bottles on her shelf settled. Breeze curled once around the house and then drifted back out across the sand, toward the harbor, past the lighthouse and the dune grass and the sleepy, waving wildflowers. Far above, the stars blinked slowly, as if in time with the heartbeats of every sleeping soul in Seabury Bay. Another night had begun. Another chapter was closed. And Breeze carried the soft hum of dreams as she made her way to the next story. Chapter 3, Mr. Featherwick's Tip-Top Trouble. At the far end of Seabury Bay, where the sand grew pebbly and the grass turned into soft moss, lived a quiet old man in a teacup-shaped cottage with a clock tower sprouting from the roof. His name was Mr. Featherwick, and he was a clockmaker. Not just any clockmaker, either. Mr. Featherwick built clocks that could whisper poems, tick in rhythm with waves, and even slow down time for an afternoon nap, though that one had a tendency to hum too loudly and attract bees. His workshop was filled with tiny golden gears, driftwood dials, shells shaped like gulls, and strings spun from spider silk. Each clock was a little bit magic, and a little bit seaside. But tonight, all was not well in the Teapot Cottage. The clocks were too loud. Tick, tock, chime, cuckoo, tick tick tick. Mr. Featherwick stood in the center of his workshop, staring up at the walls. Dozens of clocks, all different shapes and voices, were ticking and clattering and chiming out of time. Impossible, he muttered, adjusting his velvet dressing robe and tightening his sleeping cap. They're never off. He had tried everything, winding them forward, back, whispering to them, even playing his calm-down flute. Nothing worked. The clocks were restless. And so was he. Outside, the sky was deep indigo, stars peeking through like sleepy eyes. Mr. Featherwick rubbed his temples. I haven't slept a wink in 3 nights, he said to no one. Ticked clean through them. And that was when Breeze arrived. She slipped through the tiniest crack in the window, just enough space between the pane and the wood where the salt air crept in, and she swirled across the room like a ribbon of silk. Breeze didn't speak, but Mr. Featherwick looked up sharply all the same. Oh, it's you, he said, his eyes softening for the first time in days. I'd nearly forgotten how you always come around when everything feels too tight. Breeze moved gently around the clocks, brushing against their tiny pendulums, winding her way into the creaky gears, and tickling the springs. One by one, their wild ticking began to slow. She circled a large brass bell clock in the corner and then turned her attention to the smallest clock of all, a cracked wooden one shaped like a seashell, sitting quietly on a shelf of books. It hadn't chimed in years. Mr. Featherwick noticed. I made that one when my daughter was little, he said, his voice low and dreamy now. She used to say the chime sounded like laughter underwater. Breeze lifted gently beneath the shell-shaped clock, and as if remembering something long forgotten, the clock let out a soft, musical plink, a sound like rain kissing sea glass. Mr. Featherwick closed his eyes. That's it, he whispered. That's the sound. He moved to his favorite armchair, covered in quilt patches and cat fur from long ago, and sank into it with a long sigh. I think I've been so busy watching the clocks, he said, I forgot how to feel time passing. Breeze circled him like a blanket unfurling, cool, light, and full of air. He pulled a knit throw over his knees. The ticking in the workshop was now soft, slow, almost like a lullaby. He smiled. Could you maybe stay for just a little while? He asked, half asleep already. Breeze brushed the tip of his nose, soft as a whisper. Outside, the wind quieted. Even the tide seemed to hush. And in the old man's teacup-shaped cottage, the clocks ticked as they always had, but this time, they did not demand. They danced. The light from Mr. Featherwick's oil lamp had dimmed to a soft ember glow. It flickered gently, casting shadows across the curved walls like tiny dancers. In his chair, the old man breathed deeply now, slow and steady. His hands, still speckled with gold dust from clock gears, rested softly on his lap. The quiet was not silent. No, this quiet was alive. It was made of softened ticks and distant sea hush. Of wood stretching as it settled for the night. Of breeze weaving through rafters, pulling sleep behind her like a silken shawl. Mr. Featherwick murmured something in his sleep. Ellie. It was the name of his daughter. She had grown now, moved to a town where the trees changed color and snow fell in piles you could disappear into. But when she was little, she used to fall asleep in this very chair, curled up in his cardigan, while clocks hummed their lullabies overhead. Breeze brushed his brow and let a memory slip through. In his dream, he stood on the shore, holding Ellie's hand. The tide curled gently around their bare feet. The stars above were shaped like gears, slowly turning. You said time was a circle, Ellie said in the dream, her little voice clear. Mr. Featherwick smiled. And I meant it. She laughed, and it echoed like tiny bells. You don't need to fix every tick, you know, she said. Some time is meant to drift. Then, she placed a small seashell in his palm. It ticked once, then twice, and settled, warm and pulsing like a heart. When he opened his hand again, it was just a breeze. Back in his chair, the old man shifted, smiled, and sighed again. Breeze circled once more through the cottage, winding between the chair legs and rising into the tower above. Each clock now ticked in unison, not perfectly, but together. Soft. Balanced. Like the sound of a bay falling asleep. Breeze slipped out through the chimney, scattering a puff of cinnamon-smelling warmth into the night sky. The teacup cottage quieted, and a very faint plink sounded from the little shell-shaped clock on the shelf. A memory returning home. Outside, the stars had deepened, blooming across the sky like flowers made of frost and fire. Breeze drifted toward the rooftops of Seabury Bay. She had one more place to visit before the hour grew too late. On the shingled roof above the lavender house with the starfish mailbox, a sleepy orange cat curled in the moonlight, his tail twitching like a question mark. His name was Tumble. And his dreams were waiting. Chapter 4, Tumble the Rooftop Cat. Tumble was not a house cat. He had a house, technically, the lavender one with the starfish mailbox and the round window above the porch, but it was only where he napped between naps. Most nights, he belonged to the rooftops. By the time the sun dipped into the sea and the stars blinked away, Tumble had already made his way to the highest point in town, the green-tiled roof of the old music school. From there, he could see everything, the boardwalk lanterns swaying in the glass shelves, the flickering lighthouse beam, the cottony stretch of dunes to the north. He could smell Mrs. Taplin's seaweed stew and hear the distant roll of a ship bell. And when Breeze came, she always found him waiting. Tonight, she did not disappoint. She came low, slipping under eaves and chimney pots, twirling around the bell tower like ribbon on a kite. Tumble's ears twitched. His golden eyes opened slowly. Evening, he said, though it sounded more like a long, lazy blink than a word. Breeze nudged his whiskers, playful as ever. Tumble stretched long and slow, each paw reaching for a separate moonbeam. Then he stood and patted down the roofline, balancing with ease. I had a dream again, he said aloud, not to anyone in particular. Breeze listened. In it, I was a lion. Big mane. Voice like thunder. I slept in the sun so long I turned golden. He paused, sat, and scratched behind his ear with exaggerated ceremony. Then someone called my name. Only it wasn't Tumble. It was something older. A name I'd forgotten. I think it started with a Z. Breeze curled under his paws. "You ever forget something important?" he asked. She twirled once in reply. Tumble stood again. "I think maybe I was someone once. Before I was just a cat." He leapt to the next rooftop, silent as silk, and sat beside a chimney where smoke smelled like cinnamon toast. Like maybe I belonged to someone who whispered poems into my fur. Or taught me how to leap between shadows. Or showed me the stars and gave them names of their own. He looked up. Above him, the sky was perfectly brushed with moonlight and soft clouds. A few stars twinkled brighter than the rest, as if listening. "I go everywhere," Tumble continued. "And yet I never remember where I started." Breeze drifted closer, brushing along his spine, lifting one of his orange hairs into the air and carrying it into the night. "That's okay, though," he said, sighing as he settled again. "Because wherever you are, I know I'm not lost." Down in the streets, lamps flickered. A newspaper rustled. Somewhere, a porch swing creaked with the memory of a song. Tumble watched it all. And as he watched, his tail moved slowly back and forth, like a metronome counting moments instead of beats. Then, he did something curious. He stood, turned toward the edge of the rooftop, and leapt into the dark. But instead of falling, he glided. On a current of moonlight and memory, Tumble drifted down toward the dunes. Breeze followed. They landed near the softest part of the beach, where the sand held the shape of dreams and the air tasted like sea lavender. Tumble sniffed the wind, sat down, and began washing his paw with exaggerated dignity. "I remember now," he said softly. "I remember a voice." He looked out across the moonlit bay. "She used to say, 'You're not just a cat, Tumble. You're the keeper of all the in-between places. The fence tops. The railings. The hour before dawn. The moment right before sleep.'" He blinked slowly, and his golden eyes glowed. "I was a whisper in the cracks. I was comfort. That's what she said. You bring comfort, even if you don't know how." Breeze swirled around him gently, lifting sand in soft spirals. Tumble purred. And that sound, the deep, round hum of contentment, spread like a wind through the night. A reminder to anyone listening that even wanderers have purpose. Even those without answers still hold meaning. "I'll sleep now," he said, curling into a perfect circle on the sand. Breeze tucked a ribbon of air around him like a blanket. And just before his eyes closed, Tumble whispered, "Thank you for remembering me." Tumble's breathing slowed. Each rise and fall of his chest followed the rhythm of the tide, as though he were a small, living piece of the ocean itself. The sand beneath him stayed warm, cradling his curled body. Breeze rested nearby, barely moving, as if holding her breath so as not to disturb the moment. And then the dream began. It came not with a jolt or a flicker, but as a quiet blooming. A lantern, slowly lighting inside the mind. In the dream, Tumble was walking on a tightrope of starlight stretched across the bay. The sky below him was made of water. The sea above was made of stars. Each step he took sent a shimmer through the sky, like ripples on a pond. There was no fear in his steps. Just knowing. Breeze walked beside him, not as wind, but as something shaped like mist and wings. She was quiet, but full of presence. "You remember now?" she asked. Tumble nodded. "Yes. I was always meant to walk between." The rope widened with each step, until it became a silver boardwalk floating in the air. Along its edges were dream lanterns, tiny bottles of light, like lilas, glowing with captured sounds. One blinked and whispered, laughter. Another buzzed softly with the sound of a page turning. And another purred. "That one's mine," said Tumble proudly. "I left it on a windowsill once, under a pot of mint. It caught a perfect nap." They walked farther. Now the boardwalk led into a field of moon-colored grass. The stars overhead slowed, their sparkle becoming softer, steadier. Tumble blinked, then yawned. Breeze nudged him gently. "Time to rest." In the middle of the grass, a nest of old blankets waited, woven from sweaters and sunbeams. Tumble climbed in, circled once, and settled. In the dream, he looked up one last time and saw a name written across the sky, his true name, the one that had started with Z. But as soon as he saw it, he smiled and let it go. Some names weren't for remembering. Some were just for feeling. And he felt whole. Back on the beach, the wind was soft. A sandpiper clicked somewhere in the distance. Tumble's tail twitched once, and his whiskers quivered with a dream. Breeze lifted a few grains of sand and spun them gently, tucking the sleeping cat into the night. Above them, the moon tipped its light across the dunes like a kiss. And then Breeze turned inward, ready for the next rooftop, the next window, the next sleepy soul who might need a little softness before sunrise. June and the midnight night. June liked to draw maps of places he'd never been. Not just towns or forests or islands, though he drew those too, but feelings, memories, wishes. He called them invisible places, and he kept them in a blue sketchbook under his pillow. Each map had a story behind it. There was the forest of forgotten names, where lost pets went to whisper their true names to the wind. The Cloud Bridge, which only appeared to children who asked big questions at night. And the Lake of Still Time, where the water was so calm it reflected not just your face, but your favorite moment. June never showed his maps to anyone. Not even his sister. Not even his best friend. Because they weren't finished, not until he felt them. And for that, he needed Breeze. It was past midnight in Seabury Bay. The window above June's bed was cracked open, just enough for the summer air to slip in, soft and warm. His room smelled like pencil shavings and driftwood soap. A little sand still clung to his toes from a beach walk at sunset. Breeze arrived silently, as she always did, twirling through the curtains, brushing over his sketchbook, lifting a page just enough to peek at the last map he'd drawn. This one was different. It was shaped like a shell, spiraling inward, tight and small at the center. At the very middle, June had drawn a tiny pearl. Next to it, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "The pearl that told bedtime stories." Breeze gently curled around June's sleeping ear, and something in his dream unlocked. In it, June was standing at the edge of the ocean, holding the blue sketchbook. The tide came in, not water, but words, sentences lapping gently at his bare feet. He bent down and scooped a shell from the sand. It was glowing. Inside was a pearl, just like the one in his drawing. And it spoke. The voice was not loud, nor strange, nor even whispery, it was familiar. It sounded like his favorite story, like the moment before sleep, like something remembered from long ago. "Would you like a story?" the pearl asked. June nodded. So the pearl told him one. It told him about a floating teacup cottage with 1,000 ticking clocks. About a cat who dreamed in rooftops and purred in poetry. About a breeze that knew every sleepy thought before it was thought at all. And June listened. The stars above him shifted gently, glowing like tiny compass roses. Breeze drifted beside him, keeping time with the story. When June woke the next morning, the sketchbook was still under his pillow. But the map of the pearl was gone. In its place was a new one. A map made of skylines and soft air, swirling toward a lighthouse in the shape of an ear, listening. And in the margin, written in soft silver pencil, "There's always another story, waiting." June drifted back into sleep like a pebble sinking into warm sand. The map in his mind unfurled again, this time clearer. He stood at the edge of a dream path, lanterns strung above it like stars on string. The paper beneath his feet crackled like parchment, and every step he took left an inked trail behind him. Breeze whispered at his back, guiding. The lighthouse waited ahead, tall and pale, its light not bright but soft, like the glow beneath blankets. June walked slowly, barefoot. The shells along the path hummed with voices. Not loud, not words, just sounds of stories already told. A laugh shared in the dark. A sigh after a long day. The quiet of a page turning. He paused paused beside a tall dune where the sand sparkled faintly. There sat a small creature, round as a beach pebble, with eyes like tiny moons. It held a pearl in its hands. June sat beside it. The creature turned to him and held out the pearl. "Would you like another story?" it asked, voice full of hush. June nodded. This time, the pearl whispered a story not from the past, but from the future. About a boy who grew into a gentle cartographer of feelings. Who created a library of invisible maps, so others wouldn't feel lost in the dark. It was a short story. Just a feeling, really. But it made June's heart feel full and light at the same time. He tucked the pearl into his pocket and continued walking. The lighthouse was close now. It stood on a hill of cloud sand, where waves rolled not with water but memory. Its door was already open. Inside, the walls were covered with shelves. But not books, each shelf held a different kind of silence. The silence after someone says "I love you." The silence of snow falling at night. The silence of two hands held in the dark. June walked up a spiral stair, his hand brushing the rail carved from driftwood. At the top, he found a chair made of knotted blankets and a small telescope pointing out to sea. He sat, looking through it. But instead of stars or ships or waves, he saw faces. Sleeping ones. Children curled beneath patchwork quilts. Grandparents snoring gently in rocking chairs. Mothers and fathers reading with soft voices until their words trailed off into dreams. And as he watched, he heard something. Very faint. A breeze carrying bedtime stories across the sky, weaving through every open window. June smiled. The pearl in his pocket pulsed once, warmly. It didn't need to say anything. He understood now. Stories were not always spoken. Some were shared through maps, through feelings, through the quiet, through the breeze. The next morning, June awoke with his sketchbook still tucked beneath his pillow. He flipped it open and found a new drawing. A pearl, yes, but beside it, a spiral staircase, a telescope, and hundreds of small lanterns, each with a different kind of story light. At the bottom of the page, in tiny, silvery script, "The best maps don't lead to treasure. They lead to sleep." June closed the book, smiled, and felt, for the first time, that he didn't need to finish every map. Some could just be rested on. The umbrella that waited all night. Eloise and the Rain Watcher. Long after the last ice cream stand had closed and the seagulls had gone quiet, an umbrella stood on the wooden boardwalk, waiting. It wasn't new. Its handle was chipped, and its fabric smelled faintly of lemon salt. But it was still strong. Sturdy. And it had waited many nights before. The umbrella's name was Eloise. She'd once belonged to a painter, the kind who painted rain instead of running from it. He'd carry her everywhere, propped over his canvas, letting the drizzle soak his sleeves as long as it never touched the paper. But he had moved inland long ago, and Eloise had been left behind. Still, she waited. She watched the tides change, the wind skip across the ocean, the boardwalk lights sway like sleepy eyes. And every now and then, someone would sit beside her. Sometimes a child. Sometimes an old man. Sometimes just a gull. Tonight, it was Breeze who came. She circled the umbrella gently, rustling the folds of her deep blue fabric. "You're still here," Breeze said softly. Eloise didn't answer. She couldn't. But she creaked slightly, tipping ever so slightly toward the sea. "You used to shelter people," Breeze went on, her voice barely louder than the night air. "Now you shelter their stories." A gull landed nearby, quiet, then tucked its head beneath its wing. The stars blinked above, and Breeze began to hum. Somewhere far off, clouds gathered. Not loud or scary, just the kind that brought soft, nighttime rain. The kind you could sleep to. Eloise felt it in her frame, in the way the air shifted around her. She hoped maybe someone would come walking barefoot with tired eyes and need shelter once more. And just then, soft footsteps. A child. Small, bundled in a raincoat too big for her boots squishing slightly in the damp sand along the boardwalk. She carried a book in one hand and a closed flashlight in the other. She looked up and saw Eloise. The girl didn't say a word. She simply walked to the umbrella and sat beside her, curling her legs underneath and leaning into the wooden boardwalk rail. She opened the book, clicked on the flashlight, and began to read in a quiet voice, more like thinking out loud than anything else. The rain began to fall. Eloise opened gently, her old joints sighing with the memory of movement. The girl barely noticed, but her shoulders relaxed. Breeze slipped in between them, listening. The book had no title, no chapters. Just lines. Sentences. A story half-written. It was about a place where people's thoughts turned into gentle weather, where joy became sunbeams and dreams became fog, and where sadness always turned into the softest kind of rain. The girl read for a while, then stopped and whispered, "I miss my mom." It wasn't to the umbrella, or to the breeze, or even really to herself. Just to the night. Eloise held her open arms a little wider. Breeze settled over the girl's shoulders. And the rain continued, a lullaby of droplets tapping rhythmically on fabric and wood. By the time the flashlight blinked out, the girl was asleep. Still curled beside the umbrella. Still holding the book like a secret. Eloise stood tall above her, keeping the rain at bay. Breeze circled once, and then lifted the book gently, tucking it closed with a ribbon of wind. She whispered to the umbrella, "You're still sheltering stories, Eloise. You never stopped." And Eloise creaked softly. Not in sadness. In peace. The girl's name was Mira. And though her eyes were closed, her heart was wide open. As she slept beneath Eloise's curved arms and Breeze's gentle hush, a dream uncurled inside her mind like a ribbon in the rain. She was standing in a field made of puddles. But not cold puddles, these shimmered like moonlight and hummed with gentle sounds. Each one held a memory, like a quiet reflection. Mira stepped carefully from one to the next. In one puddle, she saw her mother braiding her hair on a school morning. She could almost feel the soft pull of fingers and the scent of rose shampoo. In another, a picnic at the beach, grapes, crackers, orange slices, and laughter that felt warm even now. Each puddle held a kindness. Each step made her feel both lighter and full. Then she reached the biggest puddle of all. At the center of the field. And it wasn't a memory at all. It was a feeling. She knelt beside it and looked in. There was no image. Just stillness. Silence. And then, her reflection blinked and smiled at her. "You're holding more love than you know," the reflection whispered, not with lips, but with something older and gentler. "That's what the rain is for. To remind you." Mira sat quietly beside the puddle, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the ache behind her ribs. She felt wrapped. Watched over. She looked up, and there was Breeze. Shimmering like mist, sitting beside her. "Was that your story?" Mira asked. "No," Breeze replied, "that was yours." "But you helped me find it," Mira said softly. Breeze nodded. "That's what I do. I don't write the stories. I carry them to where they belong." Mira looked up at the sky. The clouds were glowing. Tiny umbrellas floated gently downward like feathers, each one landing beside a sleeping soul somewhere in the world. And when they touched down, little stories began. A memory. A kindness. A forgotten giggle. Mira watched in wonder. "I want to help," she whispered. "You already are," Breeze said. "You listened." Back on the boardwalk, dawn approached. Faint light touched the clouds with gold. Mira stirred, blinking up at the umbrella above her, still open, still holding back the last of the rain. She sat up slowly, the dream still wrapping around her like a soft scarf. Her book was in her lap, closed and tied with a blue ribbon that hadn't been there before. She smiled, touched the umbrella's handle. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was gone, boots squishing back down the boardwalk, toward the waking world. Eloise remained. But she felt different. Not newer. Not younger. Just full again. Shelter wasn't only about the weather. It was about being there when someone needed a place to rest, even if just for one night. And breeze? She rose gently with the warming wind, lifting skyward toward the next waiting story. The next open window. The next tired heart in need of a dream. Before the beach belonged to towels and sandals, and laughter belonged to the tide. And before the tide came in each morning, the sand belonged to dreams. It was during this time, just before dawn, when the sky held the last threads of night, that a small sandcastle stood quietly near the edge of the shore. It was neither tall nor perfect. Its towers leaned ever so slightly, and its tiny archway had been shaped by careful but clumsy fingers. But what made it different was that it had a name. And a wish. The castle's name was Rue. And Rue didn't want to be just any sandcastle. He wanted to be remembered. Rue had been built by a child named Finn, the evening before. A thoughtful boy who had spoken gently to the sand as he worked, as if asking permission with every handful. He used a small blue shovel, a cracked green bucket, and his imagination. Rue had towers and windows made with thumbprints. He had a moat that curved like a sleepy smile, and a single tiny shell placed on top, a crown, Finn said, for being brave. When the castle was finished, Finn sat beside it for a long time, watching the waves. The sun sank lower. The tide crept closer. And eventually, a voice called out from far behind, Finn's mother, wrapping a towel around her shoulders. "Time to go," she said softly. Finn stood, brushing sand from his knees, and looked back at the castle. "You'll still be here tomorrow, won't you?" The sandcastle, of course, didn't answer. But Breeze was listening. She always listened. She swirled quietly around Rue, catching the shape of Finn's voice, the shape of his hope. "I'll remember you," Finn said. And then he was gone. The beach grew quiet. Only the wind and the waves spoke now. And Rue stood there, alone. He was made of soft, damp sand. He knew the tide would come. He had heard stories in the gulls' chatter and in the scrape of driftwood, stories of castles being swallowed, drawn back into the sea as if they'd never been there at all. Rue was small. He knew he couldn't stop it. But he wondered, what if he waited? What if he stayed up all night? What if someone, or something, noticed? High above, Breeze drifted slowly across the beach, wrapping herself around pieces of sea glass, loose kite strings, forgotten towels. She reached the sandcastle and paused. Rue didn't speak, but Breeze could hear the wish in his silence. A wish to be seen. A wish to stay. "I'll stay with you," Breeze whispered. "Until the tide arrives." Rue stood a little taller, if sand could do such a thing. Together, they waited. The stars twinkled. A crab scuttled by, glancing curiously at Rue's lopsided wall. A piece of kelp rolled in with the surf and tangled around the moat. And still, Rue stood. And Breeze circled gently. Not far from the shoreline, something stirred beneath the water. Something old and kind. It was the tide. She was still resting in the deep, her eyes closed, her fingers slowly reaching toward the shore. But she had felt it, something waiting for her. Not out of fear, but hope. And that was new. That was rare. The tide always moved in her own time. Not rushed. Not slow. Just rhythmic. Like a breath the earth had been taking for centuries. She stirred beneath the deep water now, rolling onto her side, as if waking from a nap inside a vast underwater blanket. Above her, fish darted through moonlight. Seaweed swayed like sleepwalkers. And far, far ahead, she could feel it. A waiting. A wish. A small voice pressed into sand. Back on the beach, Rue blinked, if blinking was something a castle could do. The sky had turned a deeper blue, a pre-dawn hush. Soft footsteps came padding through the damp sand. Not Finn's. Not yet. These feet were smaller. Rounder. A sleepy turtle had wandered up from the dunes, dragging her shell gently behind her, as if she hadn't fully decided if she was awake. She stopped when she saw Rue. Huh, she murmured, blinking slowly. A castle. Rue didn't speak, but the turtle felt something in the silence. She waddled a little closer, circling the base. Her feet left tiny comma-shaped prints. Looks lonely, she added, more to herself than anyone. Breeze circled low, brushing over the turtle's shell like a breeze might pat a friend's shoulder. He's not lonely, Breeze whispered. He's waiting. The turtle blinked again. She was not in a rush. She had nowhere to be. So she sat and watched. Time passed like a feather drifting. More stars fell asleep. The first hint of pink stretched across the farthest edge of the sky. And from somewhere beneath the sea, the tide began to rise. Her long silver fingers stretched forward, touching the edge of the world. She did not crash. She didn't roar. That wasn't her way. She simply began to move. Toward Rue. A gull landed nearby. He ruffled his feathers and tilted his head. Bit close to the water, aren't you? He squawked. He knows, Breeze said gently. The gull puffed his feathers, then settled down, tucking his beak beneath one wing. Well, I'll stay, too. And now they were three beside Rue, Breeze, the turtle, and the gull. All silent. All watching. All waiting. Farther down the beach, the first flickers of day began to whip the air. A crab popped out of his burrow. Two sand fleas bounced past like tiny sleepy sparks. And the light grew warmer. Not bright yet. Just soft enough to feel on your cheeks. Breeze lifted slightly into the sky and twirled. She could hear the tide now. Getting closer. She carried no fear, just a strange quiet joy. Rue had been seen. He had stayed. At that moment, Finn awoke in a small cottage just above the shore. He blinked up at the ceiling. Something inside him whispered, "Go low." He slipped from his bed, tiptoed past his still sleeping parents, and padded outside in his pajamas, clutching his bucket. The sand was cold on his toes. But the moment he saw the beach, his breath caught. There was Rue. Still standing. Still waiting. And around him, animals and wind and sky. Finn ran down the beach, heart thudding with wonder. He didn't speak at first. He just knelt beside Rue and touched one of the walls gently. "You waited," he whispered. And Rue felt full. Not in size. Not in shape. But in purpose. The tide was almost there now. She rose like a song with no words. Finn looked out to sea, then back at Rue. "I guess it's time." The turtle blinked once. The gull stretched his wings. Breeze circled in one last spiral around them all. And then, slowly, softly, the tide arrived. She reached Rue's moat first, filling it gently like a teacup. Then her waves climbed higher, kissing the base of the smallest tower. Finn didn't stop her. He only watched, hand resting on the side of the castle like a goodbye. Rue felt no fear. Because he had been seen. He had been held in the wind. He had been remembered. And that made all the difference. As the final tower softened, Breeze rose high into the early morning air. And from the place where Rue had stood, something small shimmered, just for a moment. Not a crown. Not a flag. Just a tiny swirl of sand and memory, caught in the sunlight. A dream, going home. The tide never stayed long. She wasn't made for lingering. Her gift was in arriving softly, and then slipping away again, like a lullaby you remember just before sleep takes you. Now, as she pulled gently back from the shore, she carried something new with her. Not just sand, not just sea foam, but the quiet trace of Rue. His shape may have melted back into the earth, but his story remained, swirling inside the water like a whispered word. The tide cradled it in the curl of her wave, tucking it deep beneath the surface where it would never be lost. She carried many things, the tide. A lost bracelet, once given in friendship. A message in a bottle that had traveled too far to remember where it began. Tiny fish dreams. And now, Rue's wish to be remembered. It nestled among the others like a pearl finding its shell. Back on the shore, Finn remained kneeling beside the soft spot where Rue had stood. The turtle was gone now, heading slowly back toward the dunes. The gull had taken flight. Only Breeze remained, brushing past Finn's hair like a hand you don't quite feel but know is there. Finn looked out at the sea. He wasn't sad. Not really. More, still. Like something had gently clicked into place, even if he didn't have words for it. Then, something caught his eye. Just to the side of where Rue had been. Half buried in the sand, small and round. Finn reached for it. A shell. But not just any shell. This one shimmered faintly, not silver, not pink, not quite golden either. It seemed to hold all those colors, depending on how you looked at it. And carved gently into its side were two tiny letters, R and F. Rue. Finn. Finn blinked slowly. He held the shell against his heart, then tucked it carefully into his bucket. Somehow, he knew. The sea remembers. The day began to brighten. Shadows shortened. The sand warmed. Families returned to the beach, towels and laughter trailing behind them. But Finn and his parents packed up early. As they walked past the shoreline, Finn turned for one last look. The sand was smooth again. Flat. But in his mind, he still saw the little castle. Not a ruin. A memory. Still standing, in a way that mattered more than stone. Far beneath the sea, the tide whispered Rue's name. And the sea passed it on. To the seagrass. To the coral. To the glimmering scales of fish too small to be seen. To a dolphin with an old scar and a soft heart. To the hush of deep water caves. Everywhere the sea moved, Rue's story flowed with it. A quiet mark of something that mattered, even if only for one night. And Breeze? She drifted inland now, floating gently above the sand and cottages, past umbrellas being opened and towels being shaken. Not searching. Just listening. Because somewhere, someone else was about to fall asleep beneath the sky. And somewhere, something small, maybe a shell, maybe a beach chair, maybe a sleepy bird, was about to hold a wish in silence. And Breeze would be there. To carry it. To keep it. Until the next tide. The tide drifted farther out now, moving slow and sure beneath the morning surface. Above, sunlight danced on the waves. Below, shadows stretched like soft threads through quiet blue. In her arms, she carried Rue's story, light as seafoam, shaped like a thought. She did not keep it hidden. She shared it. A small school of silver fish paused mid-swim when the story brushed past them. They listened, not with ears, but with stillness. And then they scattered, their motions somehow more graceful than before. A jellyfish pulsed in the deep, caught the rhythm of Rue's tail, and shimmered a little brighter. Even the coral, which rarely paid attention to anything but the slow churn of the current, stirred. And though none of them spoke, they all understood. Something had waited. And had been seen. Back on the beach, the day unfolded. Children dug holes. Parents read books under umbrellas. The beach was alive with voices now, but few noticed the strange shimmer that had briefly danced on the water. Few, except for a girl named Lila. Lila had freckles, tangled hair that smelled like salt, and a curious habit of walking quietly, as if the sand might whisper secrets if she didn't step too loudly. She had a glass jar in her hand, half full of tiny shells and half thoughts. And she was humming a tune she didn't remember learning. As she passed the place where Rue had stood, her humming stopped. She looked down. The sand was smooth. But there, half buried again, almost like it had shifted on its own, was another shell. Not the one Finn had taken. This one was rounder, a little cracked. But in the center was a single faint swirl, almost like a spiral wave. Lila bent down, brushed it off, and smiled. "I think you're meant for stories," she said softly. She placed the shell gently in her jar. The lid clicked shut. And somewhere far below, the tide smiled. That night, after the crowds had gone and the stars had returned, Lila sat on the porch of her beach cabin. She opened the jar and took out the shell. She didn't speak to it exactly, but she felt it. And as the breeze lifted through her hair and the hush of the sea stretched across the shore, she began to hum again. This time, the tune came more clearly. A soft melody, slow and sleepy, like a lullaby told by the ocean itself. Breeze curled around her gently, recognizing the shape of a beginning. Somewhere in the space between dreaming and waking, a new sandcastle was already starting to form, unseen, but ready. Far under the waves, the tide curled around a smooth rock and rested. She had delivered Rue's story. And stories, she knew, had a way of making ripples far beyond where they began. Now, she dreamed. Of castles. Of children's voices. Of the hush between waves that holds more meaning than any roar. And on the beach, just before the moon rose fully, a new breeze began to stir. It danced quietly around footprints and seaweed, past a single forgotten pail, and over the soft rise where Rue once stood. And in the sand there, right in the center of the empty space, a tiny swirl had been drawn, by wind, or tide, or memory. It was the mark of a story well told. And the sign of another one waiting. Morning came again. Bright and easy. The kind of morning where the clouds take their time and the waves hum softly. Lila returned to the beach early, before most people arrived. She walked slowly, jar in hand. But this time, she wasn't collecting. She was sharing. She knelt near the water's edge and began to dig. Not deep. Just enough to shape something. A round base. Small towers. A tiny arch made with 2 fingers pressed together. She wasn't copying anyone. She was remembering. She placed the spiral-marked shell right at the top. "There," she whispered. "Now you can see everything." Breeze watched from above. This castle didn't have a name yet. But it didn't need one. Not yet. Because Lila was telling it stories as she built. About Rue. About Finn. About the quiet joy of being remembered. And the castle listened. It didn't matter if the tide came later. It would. That's what tides do. But it wasn't the end. Because something had changed. Now, when the tide came in, it didn't just erase. It carried. It lifted. It remembered. And in return, the sand began to shape stories even faster. A starfish left behind a pattern. A breeze drew loops. A little boy dropped a feather without noticing, and it landed perfectly upright near Lila's castle. And so, stories layered gently on top of stories. Soft. Unhurried. True. Far beneath the surface, the tide stirred again. But not to rise. Just to feel. She was a keeper now. Not just of water, but of whispers and wishes. And on some future day, days or seasons from now, another tide would rise and find a castle standing quietly by the sea. And it would smile. Because the sea remembers. And the sea tells stories, too. That night, the moon was low and round, and the beach felt like a lullaby. Lila's castle stood alone again, its little towers softening in the night air. But it didn't feel lonely. Because Breeze was there, dancing her slow circles. Because the sea sighed gently, like a story well told. And because even though no one was watching, the castle still shimmered a little in the starlight. As if it knew. As if Rue had left something behind, not his shape, not his shell, but something even gentler. A feeling. A kindness that stuck to the sand like morning dew. Finn, back in his own home now, sat by his window with a strange shimmering shell in his hand. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not because it was a secret, but because he didn't need to explain it. He just held it sometimes and listened. Not for words exactly. Just for the soft hush of the tide inside. And it was always there. Like a gentle reminder. Some things are too quiet for sound, but never too small to matter. And far off, where the land met the water, and the water met the sky, the first breeze of tomorrow stirred. Not strong. Not cold. Just soft enough to carry stories from shore to shore, and from one sleepy dreamer to the next. It passed through windows and drifted over pillows. And maybe, just maybe, it's brushing your cheek now, as your eyes begin to close. Because tonight, the tide will rise again. And somewhere, a sandcastle is waiting. Not to be saved. Not to last forever. Just to be seen. And maybe remembered. By you. That night, the moon was low and round, and the beach felt like a lullaby. Lila's castle stood alone again, its little towers softening in the night air. But it didn't feel lonely. Because Breeze was there, dancing her slow circles. Because the sea sighed gently, like a story well told. And because even though no one was watching, the castle still shimmered a little in the starlight. As if it knew. As if Rue had left something behind, not his shape, not his shell, but something even gentler. A feeling. A kindness that stuck to the sand like morning dew. Finn, back in his own home now, sat by his window with a strange shimmering shell in his hand. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not because it was a secret, but because he didn't need to explain it. He just held it sometimes and listened. Not for words exactly, just for the soft hush of the tide inside. And it was always there, like a gentle reminder. Some things are too quiet for sound, but never too small to matter. And far off, where the land met the water, and the water met the sky, the first breeze of tomorrow stirred. Not strong, not cold, just soft enough to carry stories from shore to shore, and from one sleepy dreamer to the next. It passed through windows and drifted over pillows. And maybe, just maybe, it's brushing your cheek now, as your eyes begin to close. Because tonight, the tide will rise again. And somewhere, a sandcastle is waiting. Not to be saved. Not to last forever. Just to be seen. And maybe remembered. By you. The quiet that lives between the waves. There is a kind of hush that only the sea can keep. It lives not on the surface of the water, where the foam dances and the sunlight skips, but in the pause between waves, the space where sound holds its breath and time forgets to move. May knew that hush well. She had spent nearly every summer morning of her 8 quiet years walking the stretch of beach behind Grand Mary's weathered cottage, bare feet sinking gently into sand that still held the memory of night. The waves rolled in, one after another, like thoughts rising and falling, never hurried, never still. But in between them, when the water pulled back into itself and the next swell had not yet come, the world went silent. That's when May listened. Not with her ears, but with everything else. Her toes. Her ribs. The soft hollow behind her knees. The hush between the waves wasn't empty. It was full of things the sea remembered but never said. Grand Mary said nothing of these things. She moved through the house in her long linen dresses, picking rosemary for bread, brushing sand from the stoop. Her hands were always steady. Her voice, if she used it, came as gently as the sea glass that gathered at the high tide line. But she knew. May could tell. In the way Grandmary would pause sometimes at the window. In the way she always swept the porch just as the tide turned. In the way she'd leave the door open on still mornings, as if the sea might come inside and have tea. One evening, long after the sun had softened the sky into silver, May followed the hush farther than usual. She passed the driftwood log she usually stopped at. Past the broken sandcastle someone had built and left behind. And then she saw him. Sol. The boy with sea-colored hair who sometimes appeared when the wind was particularly still. He was walking away from the shore, barefoot, toward the dunes. And as always, he left no footprints until the wave pulled back and time forgot itself again. In that space, in that pause, his footsteps stayed. Just for a moment longer than they should. Then the sea came again, and they vanished. May said nothing. She never had. But she followed. Not closely. Just enough to see where the footprints ended. And when she reached the place where Sol had been, she saw something different in the sand. A shell. But not an ordinary one. It was shaped like a spiral but faintly glowing, like moonlight had folded itself into the ridges. She bent to pick it up, and in that moment, the hush returned. It wasn't quiet. It was knowing. The kind of quiet that understood things without asking questions. May stood there for a long time, the shell warm in her hand. And when the next wave came, it didn't rush. It rolled in like a sigh. And for the first time in her life, May felt the sea breathe with her. May had a habit of walking the beach just before the world finished waking. She liked the quiet time, when the tide had just slipped away, leaving behind little gifts, curled bits of shell, long strands of golden kelp, a sand dollar with a missing corner. And sometimes, if she was especially lucky, the breeze would catch her sleeve in a way that felt almost knowing. Like a nudge. Or a whisper. This morning was wrapped in mist. Not the heavy kind that hides everything. But the soft kind, like a veil the sea pulls across its shoulders when it doesn't want to be seen all at once. May tiptoed barefoot across the cool sand, still damp from the tide's breath. She wasn't looking for anything. She never was. That's when the beach gave its best secrets. When you didn't ask, but stayed open to them anyway. She passed the driftwood log that always pointed east. She passed the cluster of shells shaped like a sleeping star. And then she saw it. A slip of something, not quite paper, not quite seaweed, nestled gently beside a piece of smooth coral. It was curled at the edges, but unbroken. As if it had arrived gently and been placed there, not dropped. May crouched down. The texture was strange, silky like eelgrass, but firm. And the letters shimmered faintly, as if drawn in moonlight and salt. She read. To May. If you find this, the sea still remembers you. Follow the hush between the waves. Grandmary. May's heart did a slow, sleepy turn in her chest. Grandmary had passed away the winter before. But she had always said, the sea remembers even when we don't. May ran her thumb along the line that said follow the hush. The hush. She knew what that was, the moment between waves when the water forgets to move, just for a breath. When all is still. A pause long enough to listen to what isn't said. May folded the note carefully and placed it inside the small side pocket of her coat, the one Grandmary had sewn for treasures you don't want falling out. The tide had begun to return by then, the waves soft and shallow. And somewhere in the mist, a gull gave a single call, low, like a whisper that had lost its sharpness. May walked slowly, letting her feet sink a little with each step. She began listening. Not for sounds, but for silence. The kind Grandmary made. She reached the part of the beach where the rocks made tiny pools. The water there held the sky upside down. She paused, closed her eyes, and breathed. Wave. Pause. Wave. There it was. That small hush between them. She leaned forward. And heard nothing. Then, almost too soft to catch, and knelt. Not music, but a single sound, like the sea remembering something from long ago. It brushed her thoughts and slipped away. But she followed, because she was May, and Grandmary had left her a message. Chapter 3, Grandmary's First Sea Note. The hush drifted like a veil across the tide. May walked just behind it. Not on purpose, not exactly. But her feet seemed to know where the hush paused, and her breath began to match its rhythm. Step. Wait. Listen. The mist had begun to thin, and the tide reached softly for the pools left behind between the rocks. May stopped at the largest one. It was wide and still, like a puddle of sky. A single ripple moved through it as a crab shifted beneath a stone. May leaned over the water. She didn't see her reflection right away. Instead, she saw the shadow of a shell, long and smooth, like a spiral wave. Then another shimmer. Letters. They floated just beneath the surface. She reached her hand in. Cool. Still. The letters rose like breath bubbles and gathered into a shape. Not written on paper this time. Written in the water. The message said, "You're close now. The cave knows you. Walk until the breeze disappears. Then knock. Grandmary." May read it 3 times. Then the letters faded, pulled apart by a gentle ripple as the tide reached a little closer. A cave. She had never seen a cave on this beach. But Grandmary had known things that lived beneath noticing. May stood. The breeze still tugged gently at her hair. So she walked. Following. She passed the old pier. She passed the dune where the rabbits sometimes slept. She passed the line of dried kelp that looked like a sleeping sea serpent. And then, the breeze stopped. Just like that. No warning. No rustle. No whisper. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. May turned slowly. She was near the farthest end of the beach. A place few walked. The cliffs leaned close here, and the rocks were slick with sea memory. She stepped carefully across the stone, her hands out for balance. Then she saw it. A narrow slit between 2 rocks, low and dark. Not much taller than her knees. A cave entrance. Just barely. The tide was still out. She leaned close. Listened. Nothing. But she remembered Grandmary's words. Then knock. So she did. 3 times. Soft. Gentle. Respectful. Like knocking on a friend's door long after bedtime. And the cave answered. Not with sound, but with light. A faint, silvery glow from deep inside. Not bright. Not sharp. But enough. May knelt and crawled in. The stone was damp, but the air was warm, strangely warm. The glow led her a little farther. And then she was inside. The space opened, just enough for her to sit. And there, set in the smooth sand floor, was a glass bottle. Inside it, a ribbon of seaweed tied in a bough. Wrapped around the stone, not a message. But when May lifted the bottle, the warmth grew stronger. She held it to her ear. And the stone whispered. Some memories live in tadpoles. Others need caves. This one needed you. May held the bottle close. She didn't cry. But something inside her softened. Like a knot loosening. Like a hush finding its place. May stayed in the cave longer than she meant to. Not because she was afraid to leave, but because the air inside felt like a story still being told. And she didn't want to interrupt it. She ran her fingers along the edge of the bottle one more time, and then gently tucked it into her coat beside the first note. 2 pieces of something, quietly beginning to fit. When she crawled back out, the light had changed. The mist was gone now. The sea a wide, waiting silver. The hush between waves had deepened. May stood at the mouth of the cave and listened. The breeze returned. Just one soft pass over her cheek, as if it had been waiting too. She began walking again, back toward the wide stretch of open sand. But something felt different now, like the tide was paying attention. She reached the stretch where the sand was flat and undisturbed, where sometimes tiny shells made their own quiet constellations. Today, something new waited. A circle of stones, just large enough for sitting. And in the very center, a third note. No bottle. No seaweed. Just the note, folded and dry, as if it had never touched water. May unfolded it. The handwriting was different. Taller. Loopier. Still signed the same. Some words don't need bottles. Some find their own way to shore. Sit here and listen to the tide speak in whole thoughts. Graham Neary. May sat. She faced the sea. The waves kept coming. But she began to notice the spaces between them were changing. Not longer. Not shorter. More meaningful. As if each wave was a line in a sentence. And the hush was a pause between paragraphs. And if she listened closely enough, really listened, she could begin to hear the shape of a memory. The breeze passed again. It carried something this time. A scent like her grandmother's old shawl. Lavender and sea salt in the warmth of a porch in summer. May let her eyes close. She wasn't asleep, but she also wasn't fully awake. She was in that place between, where the stories hide before they're spoken, where the sea writes its oldest truths. And she heard it. Just for a moment. A voice like tidewater and lullabies. May, the hush has more to tell. But only if you keep listening. Her eyes opened. The tide had drawn closer. The sun was beginning to rise behind a veil of soft clouds. May stood. The sea had changed her. Not in a loud, sudden way, but in the quietest way that matters. She turned toward home. And as she walked, she felt the pearl in her pocket warm again. It hadn't forgotten. That evening, the hush returned. Not as something to chase, but as something that found May. She was sitting on the porch of her small cottage, a quilt around her knees, and the sound of the waves curled just far enough to kiss the shore. The pearl, still in her pocket, warmed once more. She held it in her hand, and for the first time, she noticed a tiny shimmer inside the shell's spiral. A light, no bigger than a freckle, but pulsing like a heartbeat. She brought it to her ear. No voice this time, just a sound that wasn't quite music, and not quite silence either. A sound like remembering, and the hush, soft and full, wrapped around her. The next day, May returned to the shore, not to find another note, not even to listen, just to walk. But the tide left her something anyway. A mirror of water, shaped like a crescent moon. And in its reflection, she saw it. Not herself, but the porch where she and Graham Neary used to sit. The rocking chair gently moving. The mill wind touched it. The mug, always half full of tea. And her grandmother's shawl, resting over the railing as if she'd just stepped inside. May blinked, and the image faded. But something remained. She touched the spot where the hush lived now. Just behind her ribs, where the sea had taught her to listen. That night, as stars took their places in the sky, May sat once more in the circle of stones. She held the pearl in her hand, and let the breeze settle across her shoulders like a blanket. She didn't speak. She didn't search. She simply waited. And the tide, with all its ancient patience, rolled forward like a memory just beginning to be told. The hush has more to say, she thought. And I'm learning how to listen. And beneath the blanket of night, and the silver hush between waves, May finally understood. Grand Mary hadn't left the shore. She'd simply become part of it. And May had found her way back to where stories wait in stillness, where pearls glow softly with memory, and where the hush between waves is never empty, just full of what comes next. Chapter 4: The Tide That Dreamed in Shells. The next morning arrived like a yawn, slow and stretching. Soft gold spilled across the sand, and the tide moved lazily, as if it, too, had stayed up late listening to the hush. May stepped outside with bare feet and a mug of warm lemon tea. The pearl was still in her pocket, but this time it didn't glow. Instead, it pulsed gently, like a shell that had fallen asleep with the sea still inside it. She smiled. The hush was still with her, but now it felt like something she could carry, like a rhythm she knew by heart. That day, May didn't go to the old cave or the stone circle. She followed a path she hadn't taken in years, a winding stretch of sand that led to the oldest part of the beach, where tide pools clung to rock and whispered stories only starfish could hear. There, nestled between two low boulders, was something new: a driftwood cradle. Inside it, a handful of seashells, each one different, colors like dusk and cotton in moonlight. She bent down. Some of the shells had tiny holes, like they had once been worn as necklaces. Others were whole, but curved in ways she hadn't seen before. She picked up the largest, a pale lavender spiral, no bigger than her thumb. And when she held it to her ear, she didn't hear the sea. She heard a voice, faint, familiar, and wrapped in calm. Dreams that drift don't disappear, they find new shores. May closed her eyes. The breeze paused, and the hush bloomed again. She stayed by the driftwood cradle for a while, turning over each shell, listening for whispers. Some were silent, others hummed, but 3 of them spoke. Each time, May heard a different part of Grand Mary's voice, as if the sea had tucked away pieces of her wisdom inside the tide's jewelry box. The last shell she picked up was the smallest of all, flat, iridescent, and cool as moonstone. She brought it close. It didn't speak. It sang, just a single note, clear, soft, familiar. The tune Grand Mary used to hum while kneading bread, or brushing the sand from May's shoulders when she was little. It brought warmth to her eyes, not tears, but memory, alive and gently shimmering. May placed the shell gently back in the cradle, then whispered, "Thank you." The breeze returned, carried a scent of lavender and flower and tide, and the pearl in her pocket pulsed again. A new hush was beginning, not between waves, but between the pieces of her own story. That afternoon, the sky grew quieter. Clouds gathered in soft loops, as if the breeze had folded them gently for later. May followed the tide, not down the usual path, but along a narrow inlet tucked behind the dunes, one she had almost forgotten. When she was little, Grand Mary called it the listening curve, because, she said, the wind behaved differently there. It didn't rush. It lingered, like it was remembering something important. The sand here was finer, soft enough that her toes sank gently with each step. The shells weren't scattered. They were arranged, in trails that curved like writing. May knelt. The trail nearest to her formed a spiral. At its center, a single blue mussel shell, turned upward like a tiny cradle. Inside it, resting like a lullaby, was a paper-thin piece of sea glass, translucent, oval, and etched with a single word, "Still." She held it to the light, and the hush came again. Not from the sea this time, from the inlet, from the breeze, from the place beneath her collarbone where quiet things wait. And in that hush, a memory rose, not her own, She could feel it, like a tide-shaped thought. A girl much younger than May, running along this very curve, laughing. Grandmary. May let the hush wrap around her. She could almost hear Grandmary's feet patting the sand, could see her small hands scooping up shells, turning them into stories even then. The hush held May there, still, listening, and when it finally let go, she stood up, cradling the sea glass. Farther along the inlet, the trail of shells changed. Now they shimmered pale and gold, and led to a tide mooring log that had settled into the curve like an old friend. May sat. The hush returned like a breath. She placed the sea glass in her palm and closed her fingers around it. Still, she thought, like tide pools before the stars come out. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't just finding memories. She was becoming one the sea might keep, not in bottles, or notes, or shells, but in stillness, in hush, in the shape of footsteps left behind on the listening curve. That night, the stars arrived early. They peeked through folds of lavender clouds, blinking quietly as if careful not to wake the world too soon. May returned to the listening curve. This time, she brought no lantern, no pearl, no journal, just herself, and the hush that now lived inside her. The tide was out, but it left behind mirrors. Tide pools stretched across the inlet, like open eyes, reflecting the sky. May stepped carefully between them. Her reflection followed. But sometimes, just briefly, it wasn't her face she saw. It was Grandmary's. Laughing, blinking, looking upward. Always upward. May stopped at the driftwood cradle, where the shell trail had begun. The sea glass was gone, but in its place, a new word had been left, etched into the sand this time. Remember. The breeze moved softly around her, and with it, a song, faint, like wind chimes in a dream. She turned. At the far end of the inlet, where the rocks curved into the surf, a figure stood. Not a shadow, not a ghost, just a shimmer. Light caught in the shape of someone waiting. May stepped forward. Slow. Careful. The hush grew deeper. Every step felt like turning a page. When she reached the end, there was no figure. Only a tide pool, still and glowing. Inside it, a single spiral shell that pulsed with gentle light. She knelt beside it, held her breath, and listened. This time, the shell didn't whisper. It echoed. Grandmary's laugh, her lullabies, the sound of wind brushing curtains, and May's own voice, telling stories, not just remembering them, but passing them on. The hush isn't only for me, she thought. It's for the next listener. She dipped her fingers into the pool. It was warm, and when she withdrew her hand, she found another piece of sea glass, pressed gently into her palm. This one read, "Begin." May stood for a long while, watching the shell in her hand. The word "begin" glowed faintly in the twilight, as if the sea had etched it in moonlight. The hush wrapped around her like a shawl, not ending, not pausing, but inviting. A tide beginning to turn. She walked back along the listening curve, feet tracing the path her younger self had once run, and Grandmary before her. Each step left no sound, only story. The breeze moved beside her, sometimes ahead, sometimes brushing past, as if it too were ready to begin again. When she reached her cottage, May didn't go inside. She sat on the porch, the pearl resting in her lap, and the sea glass beside it. She picked up her old journal. The pages were mostly blank. Not anymore. May opened to the first page and began to write. Not with worry, not with rush, with hush. Words came like shells, each one placed gently like an offering. Tonight the tide told a story in shells, and I listened. She paused, smiled, then kept going. Gran Miri once said the best stories weren't told loudest. They were the ones that waited, patient as the sea, until someone leaned close enough to hear. And May, sitting with the moon above and the hush all around, knew now that she had become part of that quiet, part of the tide that dreamed and remembered and began. The pearl pulsed once more, a soft breath of light. May whispered to it, to the sea, to the breeze and the shells and the stories. I'll tell them all. And the hush answered back. We know. The waves sighed against the shore, and the breeze, with all its slow, gentle magic, began to hum a lullaby. Not an ending, but a bedtime beginning.